Hello and welcome back to our final session here at Changing Channels, the latest event in our GI Live series of digital shows. I'm excited about this session, which is saying something because we've been doing this event now for 12 hours. If you pay attention to GamesIndustry.biz, which you should do, you can't have missed the sheer number of games IPs being turned into TV and films. Cyberpunk, Disco Elysium, Fallout, Beyond Good and Evil, The Last of Us. Not a week goes by without the news of a new TV show in development based on a video game. After The Witcher, which is technically not a game IP, but pretty much is, video games IP seem to have become the next destination for TV makers now that every comic book IP in the world has been exhausted. But with thousands of games out there, where do you even begin? To help answer that, we have some real experts with us, and they are Dimitri Johnson from DJ2 Entertainment, Matthew Booch from BBC Studios, and Suyina Mapama from Bits and Pixels. Welcome to Changing Channels.
Thank you.
Hey.
To begin with, because why not? I would like to sort of introduce yourselves and sort of explain why you are on this panel, I guess. Matthew, shall we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I am head of special projects for BBC Studios drama. So I deal with sort of high value, international facing drama, exactly like The Witcher. And that's what's brought me into looking at games and brought me into contact with you guys and with the game industry in general. I started in November, so it's very early on for me, but we've already made contact with a number of big studios, and we're in talks for various sort of high value IP.
Suyina?
I'm Suyina Farmer from co-director of Bits and Pixels agency. We are an agency that specialises in video game licensing, amongst other things. My business partner, Sandra Arkan, and I set up the business about 4 years ago because we're gamers ourselves. We've got a lot of experience in the gaming industry, and we really wanted to bridge the gap between the licensing industry and the video games industry. So what that means is, really sort of helping, IP owners realise the potential in their brands, as well as any partners, whether they're licensees, whether they're non-specialist retailers, or whether they're fashion brands, to realise that there's this huge opportunity in video games.
Dimitri?
Dimitri Johnson, CEO, co-founder of DJ2. I am here because almost 10 years ago, DJ2 was born with actually a fellow Brit, Dan Jevons, and my belief that video game adaptations for film and TV weren't bad because of the source material, but the way they were treated. So we wanted to set out on a mission to prove that if you treated, a video game property the way you would treat a New York Times bestseller, you could have something that can go off and potentially win awards. So we've been on that mission, and it feels like it's finally starting to get some momentum.
Oh, great. Well, as you sort of heard from actually over the last 12 months, we've seen some video games IP perform well in film and TV, commercially and critically. Detective Pikachu, Sonic the Hedgehog, and I know, again, not technically a games IP, but The Witcher. Let's start with you, Dimitri. What has made these work, whereas perhaps previous efforts have not always hit the mark?
I mean, I can, as one of the early producers on the Sonic movie, I can kind of tell you, even with something like a Sonic, it was important to the entire team that we really treated the IP, the character, the source material, again, with love and respect, and, wanted to tackle it in a way that, I think maybe 10 years ago might not have gotten that opportunity. I think, with things like Castlevania, Sonic, Pikachu, I think that Hollywood is finally seeing that games can, be something that an audience will come out for. Again, if, in the same way Chris Nolan took Batman and treated it like a tentpole film, we can do that in games.
Suyina, do you have any views on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that The Witcher worked really well because it was episodical as well. It wasn't like, let's explain the whole of the Witcher universe in 90 minutes. And they weren't also trying to kind of explain things. I know it's based on a book, but, they weren't putting in gaming elements in there that, might not make sense in a sort of on screen. And similarly with, you know, Detective Pikachu, they weren't sort of making a movie about let's collect them all, let's collect all the Pokemon. It was a story that was set in the Pokemon universe. So, you know, that way you can actually tell, you know, a really good story. And they took what was, you know, what was really loved about Pokemon, which is like cute creatures with silly names, and they just made it really cute and charming.
Do you have any views on that, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, I think both Sugina and Dimitri touched on that. I think it's about character, and I think it's about extracting those characters from the games. And I think certain games lend themselves more obviously. I mean, actually, what's interesting is that Sonic and Pikachu probably aren't obvious, which is kind of great testimony to that, those creative teams that, in a way, they're blank canvases, so you can project things onto them, and it's about the spirit of it more than the character itself. I think with something like The Witcher, it's easier because it's a semi-open world game. You've got a very highly developed world. There's a milieu there. There's a set of really fascinating characters. There's some great, not necessarily storylines, because I think it's a mistake. And I think one of the best things The Witcher did was not take specific storylines from the game, as far as I'm aware of. I've only seen about 5 episodes, to be honest. But I think what it did was capture the spirit of it and the tone of it. And I think it's much easier in open world games. I mean, you could envisage a Red Dead Redemption movie much more easily than a simpler puzzler, for example, being adapted. So there's a kind of natural flow, I think. So, yeah, I mean, I think it all really ultimately, as all drama does, it comes down to character.
But surely, if there can be a Battleships movie, we can have a Candy Crush film, right? I mean, that's.
Yeah, I guess that's where it comes into blank canvas. I didn't see Battleships, but I can't imagine it was the best movie ever.
No. Anyone, I can see there's some people watching on YouTube. If you do have any questions, do drop them into the chat, and I'll pose them to the team here. Well, as I said earlier, not a week goes by at the moment without news of the Netflix, Amazon, or whatever making something based on the game's IP, or announcing they're going to make something based on the game's IP. Why is there a bit of a gold rush going on in games at the moment? What's caused this to happen? Should we start with Matthew?
Yeah, I think it's partly because there is a massive increase in the volume of TV being produced, or at least it was being produced before Corona came along. But I mean, if we take Corona out of it, still the sort of broad trend is that we're producing a huge number of additional hours than we were, say, 5 or 10 years ago. And that's partly because of the proliferation of platforms that are voracious for content. I think, so this is just a simple supply and demand issue. People are looking for more material, so they're looking at wider ranges of IP. I think people have realised the game is a much more broad-based thing. I think certainly in the UK, there was a perception that it was a very adolescent male activity, and actually time and time again you see studies that actually disprove that almost entirely. I mean, yes, it tends to skew slightly younger, but a lot of those younger gamers that grew up on the Nintendo 64 or even further back are now getting older, so it is broadening out. So I think TV companies have realised two things. One is that there's actually a broad range of an audience there, but also that key 16 to 34 demographic is absolutely full of core gamers. So there's an obvious link there. I think if you go to LA, and Dimitri can talk to this more than I can, but certainly my sense of LA particularly is there's so many independent production companies looking at so much IP that you're looking at really quite small articles sometimes being pulled off various social media platforms, journalism, and made into things, or at least adapted and offered up to the various commissioning platforms. And so I think gaming's kind of been swept along with that. But I think it's also primarily because people have been alive to the fact that gaming is now developed to a point where the demographics there, but also the storylining sophistication is there. A lot of people are surprised, I think, when they play things like The Witcher, that there's a lot of detail, there's character progression, there's psychological depth, and actually we are getting to a point. I mean, the term interactive movies is disastrous for all sorts of reasons, but for want of a better phrase, we are moving towards that now, and the next generation of consoles will just bring that even further forward in terms of not only visual integrity, it will be the number of branching pathways and the verisimilitude of that. So, so I think does that answer your question?
And then some, I think. But it's not, you're not the only one with you. I mean, Suyina, do you have have you noticed something about why people are suddenly flocking to games?
Yeah, I think, I totally agree with what Matthew said. And also, video games industry has such a wealth of ideas and creativity and storylines and characters. I think, there might be a bit of fatigue with movies where we're seeing a lot of remakes of already great films and loads of sequels and, reimagining of the same brands, like, lots of Marvel, lots of Star Wars. And then with video games, there's just so many incredible stories to tell. And also, video games have one of the most passionate fan bases, like similar to, the comic industry. Video game fans are really passionate and they're massive. And, I think if you were to use a video game IP for a movie or TV show, you've already got that inbuilt audience who would flock to see it if it was done right. So yeah, it does present a great opportunity.
Well, Dimitri, what's brought you in as well, in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. I would just kind of add that even before the virus kind of, put a pin in going to see features the way we used to, I would argue that TV had kind of become king for the last few years, both in, where budgets can go now versus 10 years ago, the different platforms and really the support and the, risk they're willing to take. And I would equally give a lot of credit to the kind of indie game boom we've seen, great developers and publishers, like Devolver and Raw Fury, who we're working with, that are really taking some creative chances on the types of games that would not have probably gotten made 5 or 10 years ago. For us, looking at, things to adapt to film and TV, it's incredible. Because I mean, again, one of the first things we look at is this something unique? Is this a story that needs adapting for film or TV? Are there other things like it already out there? And because of some of these, like risk, what would have been considered, again, riskier games, we're finding just an amazing, resource, especially looking in that indie side.
Well, I'm going to ask you about the indie stuff in a minute, actually, because I think it's really fascinating, some of the projects that you've picked up. But I'll go to Suyina first, because before we came on, Matthew made a comment about how the games industry has been really welcoming to people looking to license, when it comes to production companies approaching video games companies have been very receptive to that. Suyina, you sort of specialize in this area. Has that always been the case, or has there been a change in terms of how the video games industry's attitude towards licensing itself?
Yeah, I think, previously video IP owners might have been quite protective of their brands, and maybe thought that, licensing out might be a bit of a sellout, then perhaps they saw their products being, just the logo slapping on mugs and t-shirts. But actually, it has come a long way. And, licensing is a way of, expanding on the brand and providing, new ways for audiences and, fans to engage with the brand. So, whether that's through board games or fashion or films or collaborations, it's a new way to engage with the fan base and also to reach a wider audience. So yeah, I think that we've worked on a couple of collaborations which have been quite interesting. So with Destiny, who we represent, we worked with a fashion brand called Palladium, who make these these fashion boots, and their sort of core values and sort of brand message is all about exploration. So with Destiny, the game, which is where you play Guardian and you explore the universe, that there was a great synergy there. So I think when you have a synergy with like the gaming IP and the licensee, or another lifestyle brand, fashion brand, you can really reach a wide audience. So Palladium are reaching the wider game audience, and the gaming brand is reaching getting their brand out there. And especially with not everyone might want to play video games, so I think expanding into onto the screen is a great way of getting your stories and your work out there to a wider audience.
I'm one of my favorite games at the moment is Sea of Thieves, which is made by the UK team Rare, and they actually built a licensing program before they released the game. They had they had planned books and comics, and some of the stuff had even been released beforehand. And when I spoke to them recently about that, they said that we didn't want to do logo slaps.
Yeah.
The industry's moving away from that, and I guess that backs up what you just said there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so on the one hand, you know, the video game the video game industry are getting savvy to licensing, not only as a way of generating revenue, but also just, you know, getting their brand out there in front of a new audience. But on the other hand, you've got you know, licensees who traditionally may have been a bit sort of trepidatious about video games. You know, I think they had certain old ideas about who gamers were. You know, are they just, you know, young men, or are they, you know, are they girls as well? And so, you know, they're really opening up now to this opportunity and understanding and really getting to know the gaming brands as well, because that's so important. You can't just sort of like, you know, you can't not understand the gaming brand and then like put, you know, products out there and expect the fans to sort of just buy it. So, you know, I think we're seeing changes in the licensing industry. Also, just general brands are, you know, opening their eyes to video games, and non-specialist retail as well. Again, you know, previously they may have thought, you know, do we want to have stock, you know, merchandise for a game that has guns in it? But actually, you know, when you think of something like Star Wars, you know, there's guns in that, and it's not, you know, obviously not all games are that, or, you know, mature or adults only. So yeah, everyone is sort of realizing now that video games presents a great opportunity.
Is that how you've experienced it, Matthew? You said that they've been quite welcoming.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm quite new to it in terms of gaming and approaching gaming brands and companies. Yeah, I think people are excited, actually. I think, you know, when we approach them and sort of say, look, we want this for TV, and I think that's partly obviously because people have seen the success of things like The Witcher, but I think hopefully it's because we're, you know, I think we have a reputation. I think certainly we want to maintain a reputation for being quite collegiate and quite collaborative, and you know, we very much approach gaming brands as if they're the same, really, in a sense, as graphic novels or classic novels or contemporary literature or whatever. So we're not going to them and going, oh yeah, that silly little game thing, can we just, like, you know, can you just license it to us and then we'll just make a drama that you know, we want to. We're very much approaching it as, look, you've created this amazing complex world, you know, and if it's, you know, it could be Drake's Fortune, it could be Dishonored, it could be a bunch of different games, and you know, you've done all that creative work, and you know, we want to collaborate with your creatives and look at the material you've created, just as like we'd buy a manuscript before it's published. We treat that the gaming material in the same way. So I think hopefully it's because we're coming at them as legitimate, if you like, creatives, and recognizing that gaming is just a different mode of storytelling. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we found the other great thing, and the sort of the reason we started to get into this beginning of the year is that, and I must say, I hadn't realised the sort of richness of British development studios and the amount of these really, really great software companies that are out there that are, you know, quite small companies often. Sure, they're often parented by Microsoft or whoever, but, you know, they are guys who, you know, it's a really successful industry here. And I think, you know, just to be slightly grand about it, but, you know, as the BBC, we really feel we should be supporting that. And, you know, it's important that there's a sort of, there's a Britishness about it, you know. And if you take games like Fable, they're very, very specifically British, and in a way we're very well positioned as a British broadcaster and studio to take that and to adapt it in a way that's got a lot of integrity. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's been incredibly exciting and really, really fruitful so far.
Yeah, there are those British games that are distinctly British, aren't they? I mean, you've got the Media Molecule games, the Rare games, I talked about them a minute ago. Also, the you mentioned Fable, which is coming back, which is really exciting. I'll ask a question to Dimitri. I mean, the fascinating thing that you've done is you've brought a number of more niche, indie, smaller scale they're still very popular games, but you've brought them to TV and film. What made you want to work, or are you bringing them to? What made you want to work with these types of projects?
First, I want to just tell Matthew that he's correct, and there are a lot of great teams there. We're working with a lot of them, so give me a call because we may have some stuff for you. Yeah. But no, I think you know, for us, like we just last week we just closed a deal around an IP that's the scale of a Sonic. It's a big one, but we don't chase big or small. To be honest, we chase great stories, great worlds, things that excite us. And again, it just seems for this moment that a lot of it's coming out of the indie space. And I would also tie this into the previous question. You know, it comes down to trust. And I think that making a partner and really getting to know a lot of these creators and the teams and the sacrifices that go into getting these games made, and, you know, the risk that they're taking on a personal level, you know, when someone like myself comes in and says, you know, love your game, think it would be a great TV series, you know, it's important that they understand that, you know, we are not unaware of the sacrifices made to get that game out there that we now love and want to adapt. And you know, not all of the time, but, you know, we have a belief that, again, in the past, a reason why some of these adaptations didn't work is, you know, Hollywood was sometimes guilty of taking the rights of an IP and kind of shoving the people aside who made that thing that you loved in the first place. And, you know, our philosophy has always been, yes, the core business for you is making games. However, if you have the bandwidth and the time and the interest, we absolutely value, you know, you as a resource and want you to be a voice in that room or a voice as we're developing that film. So, you know, that's kind of how we approach it. And again, like, you know, there's your Disco Elysium, which, you know, it's so incredibly imaginative and the expansive world building. And we just know like filmmakers are going to eat that up. Like, it's just such a rich world that you want to be in. And you know, the team at Zom, like everything they've done, like it's been a pleasure to work with them. But I would even point to something that now, if I said the name, you would laugh and not call it an indie title, but Life is Strange. You know, when we first partnered on Life is Strange with Square Enix, it was absolutely not this massive IP that it is today. You know, for us, it was really about a story around two women, friendship, you know, that had grown apart, come back together, and there happened to be this kind of, you know, time device that was part of the game. But that was almost secondary to the core story for us. And, you know, growing up, being a big fan of something like a Dawson's Creek, you know, there was some of that in there. And, you know, and that was what excited us, you know, the human story and the characters. And yes, it is a bonus when that thing can then kind of grow with you and kind of explode and turn into this whole other animal. But like, you know, and there's the, you know, super smart, heady ones. And then there's just the fun stuff. You know, my friend Pedro, you know, we got to see that a couple of years ago when we were giving a talk in Malmo, Sweden, and it was batshit crazy love at first sight. And being able to talk to Victor, who essentially was, you know, pretty much a one-man team, we knew that we wanted to do something with it. And to be able to bring the John Wick team around that, that's like the dream, you know, to take a game made by, you know, one person essentially in a small town in Sweden and bring, you know, the team from one of the biggest action franchises. For us, that's the mission statement, you know, bringing those elements together and hopefully creating something incredible together.
I feel we've touched upon this question quite a bit, including what you just said there, Dimitris, but I'll ask it so we can be specific about it. When it comes to looking for video games brands to adapt to TV, so what works? What makes you go, that's going to work? And what makes you go, I know you've talked about character already, but what makes you think, you know what, that's probably not best suited to the medium? Matthew?
Oh, sorry, is that for me?
It could be for anybody.
Yeah, I think the guiding thing for me, honestly, was just games I'd really enjoyed playing. So that's the first. It's just an instinctive thing, I think, and I think that's a really important part of that sort of initial creative impetus. I mean, obviously, you then sort of go through that professional process of saying to yourself, well, Yeah, to some extent, you look at the market and what it's reacting to and what's there already. So, you know, we wouldn't just go after something similar to The Witcher just because, you know, The Witcher's been successful, because that tends not to work. It's also about the wider market, what's working in TV, what's working in storytelling generally. I mean, obviously, I've touched on character, which is really, really critical. What's interesting is particularly, obviously, you know, games, generally speaking, you play one character, so that's the first focus. It's like, well, who is that character? Is that somebody who, you know, is already relatively three-dimensional? Could they become somebody who is really compelling and generate lots of really exciting plot and narrative? I think sometimes you have to kind of check your own enthusiasm for certain games, because I think sometimes they're so singularly focused on one person's experience, and the world probably, without the interactivity and the kind of visceral nature of that interactivity, it may not necessarily translate to drama. But, you know, we're in the business of adapting. There's lots of not very good books that have made actually really pretty good movies or TV. So, and I think that applies in a slightly different way to games. I think you can have a good game which is great because it's a game and because it's interactive and because it has certain kinds of features that don't automatically translate. So in a sense, it's not an obvious thing. So, I mean, Sonic is a classic example. I mean, if you play that game, you're not kind of thinking, I'm being led through this extraordinary narrative. You're having a great time, but you're not thinking about story necessarily. But I think, you know, with a lot of imagination, you can take elements of that world, the sort of the vividness of that world, and you can translate it. But of course, the job of adaptation is that much bigger for something like Sonic. In terms of the stuff we're looking at the moment, in a way, and you know, because we haven't signed deals yet, I can't talk about them. But I think when hopefully we get those things over the line, I think people will obviously, they'll say, yeah, of course you've gone for those ones. They're fairly obvious places to go, either because there's an obvious British connection or because there's already a very rich narrative. So I think it all ultimately boils down to who are those characters, and is that world something where, you know, an audience is going to want to spend time.
Yeah, I guess that explains the Angry Birds movies. Oh, Dimitri, same question to you then. I mean, I know you have, again, you've sort of touched upon it, but what works, what doesn't when it comes to games in film?
So I again agree with a lot of what Matthew said. I think another thing we consider when looking at adaptation is, you know, is there a very clear-cut A to B story, and is there room to tell a different story? Because for us, we never want to tell the exact story that someone can get from playing the game. So, you know, again, we tend to be drawn into worlds where, you know, even if we tap into some of the characters from the game, we can create a new experience for the fan base, and hopefully new, you know, people coming to the franchise in the same world, but giving them a different experience. And then, you know, yeah, character. You know, if you have great characters, you know, the series can have legs. Like you can go anywhere with, you know, great characters.
Is that what you found in your experience, Sienna?
Yeah, I think, you know, characters, storyline, you know, universes, the whole universes that, you know, the video game industry creates are just so compelling, and, you know, gamers spend, you know, hours and hours, you know, invested in these brands. So yeah, I think that you know, storytelling, characterization, and just the, you know, the universe, and also the aesthetic as well, I think can be really interesting. But, you know, I think, you know, there are some games that where the story is just told so beautifully through the game, it can't really be translated into a you know, on screen. So for example, like, you know, games that I really enjoyed, like Inside and Journey, you know, there's no talking, there's no real like characterization. It's all sort of almost like part of that is your imagination. And, you know, I think that it might be difficult to translate that into a movie, but you could create something that lives within that world, within that universe. So you could sort of tell, you know, an alternative story that's happening in that universe, so that the experience isn't, you know, the screen experience isn't just trying to sort of copy what's happening in the game, but it's like a complementary experience.
Oh, okay. Good answers, great answers. We actually have a question in the chat And we had a couple going over social media as well. I think this is actually probably one for Dimitri, but anyone can answer it. Rod Caballa, probably got his name wrong. Just Rod asks, what would an independent IP owner have to have to be taken seriously by broadcasters, firms, licensing folks when trying to shop their IP around? Actually, this is for any of you. Who are the gatekeepers in the transmedia realm? Actually, I think Sue, you might be able to start on that one.
What do they need to do to make their IP stand out? Is that a question?
It's like 3 questions. What does an independent IP owner have to do, know, or have to be taken seriously? And then who are the gatekeepers in the transmedia space?
Gosh, well, I mean, it needs to be, a game with, that's done relatively well. It needs to have a good story, needs to have good characters, a great, a unique style. But I think that, there's, when it comes to licensing, there's like a whole chain. First of all, there needs to be the demand from, the players. And then that needs to sort of translate into retail. So, retailers need to know that it's a popular gaming brand. And then that kind of then feeds into the licensing industry where, licensees are thinking this is a gaming brand that we need to take, that we need to look at. But I don't think it's, video game licensing isn't just for, the big established IPs. It's, it's for indie games as well. We've worked with indie games before. And, some of the greatest stories and some of the greatest characters are in indie games. Like one of the games that we worked on called Echo. And I know, Dimitri, I think you have the rights to that one for the movie, which I'm really pleased about because it's amazing. It looks great. It's a great story. So yeah, it's all about having, it's about believing in your brand. It's about, what are the, what's unique about it and what's, why do people want to play this game? And making sure that, that anyone that you approach is aware of that.
Is that same for you, Dimitri? Is that what they need to do to be taken seriously?
I would, for us, for what we're doing, we're not, necessarily paying much attention to the numbers. So you could start by just dropping us a line at the contact email address. And, we've actually had a lot of conversations start that way. But 2 of the properties that we're in development on now, and I wish I could say what they are, easily one of the properties I'm most excited about is being fast-tracked at the network. I couldn't even tell you how many copies the game sold. It was just an incredible world, a great hooky story. And from there, we were able to sit down with different writers, directors, find the right voice and kind of build out from there. So even though by the time it gets to air, it'll, feel like a lot of it is an original series, the core DNA is absolutely from that small indie game. And, again, the Sonics and some of the other big titles are fantastic. But again, we want to try to slowly train the industry that it doesn't have to be a Halo-sized IP to be valuable if, again, there's a great story there. And, I will say in the last few years, it's gotten easier and easier to do that.
Okay. Well, I mean, one of the things that we're starting to see in games is games companies themselves increasingly getting involved in the productions. They've even set up their own outfits. Like I think Sony has one, Ubisoft Motion Pictures is one as well. How important is it that game creators themselves are involved in the creation process? Or is there a risk that they can perhaps get too involved? Probably another one for Dimitri.
I would say it's a thin line. Again, at this point, we've kind of built a precedent in our own deal where our video game partners legally have a voice at the table. So we absolutely value that, and we want that all the way through as much as they have the bandwidth to provide it. Having said that, there are people who dedicate their entire life to getting very good at making film and TV. And I think that there's got to be that balance of having that trust on that side in the same way there needs to be that same trust on the other side and getting that, kind of landing right in that sweet spot. I think too much control on either side could potentially go off the tracks.
Do you agree, Matthew?
Yeah, I think it's always a balance, and it depends on individuals generally, which is a sort of non-answer. But I think the sort of principle of it is, to be honest, it's conversation. Some people, what we've found certainly with graphic novels, and to some extent actually with authors, is that the people don't want to be involved. Some people just want a big check. Some people want to be vaguely involved and possibly, just don't change these two bits. And you might even get into a contractual relationship about that. Don't change the sex of the character or whatever. I think that it's similar with games. I think it's an individual negotiation. I think probably, and I speak largely from ignorance here, but I think probably because games tend to have bigger teams in terms of the number of contributions to narrative. Sometimes they have leads, but they often have big teams. It's probably slightly more complex to weave through kind of who you should be talking to, who should be there at the table. We certainly, as Dimitri's alluded to, we when we go in for a property, we want to enhance that through the adaptation and adapt it properly. And you can't really do, if you're attracted to something for creative reasons, then you need that creative impetus with you on the journey. Obviously, there has to come a point where that person who's developed a game narrative, which is obviously hugely branching, it's a complex narrative, which is slightly different to television, which is, actually shorter. I think Sienna was kind of making the point that the level of engagement with narrative in games is incredible. You can spend literally days, cumulatively playing through these narratives, and it means you've got slightly different narratives. They're dense, but in a different way. You have to be much more intense in television if you've only got 42 or 45 minutes. So, I think the short answer is it does depend on the case. I think that there is always a point where you have to develop a relationship of trust to the point that the person who originally created that IP in a game can kind of go, look, you've got my blessing, go away and make it. Yeah, I'll watch the rushes and I'll watch some cuts and I'll give some notes, but actually I'm not going to stand behind the director and say, well, it wasn't like that in the game, which is, of course, you can't make TV like that.
No. Sienna, do you find that developers want to be involved, or?
I think sometimes they do. I think sometimes game creators can sort of fancy themselves as directors, but I think that as Matthew and Dimitri have just said, that you do need to develop that trust. You need to be open to your brand being interpreted in a way that makes it accessible on the screen to a wide audience, because you can't always take things that are in game that make sense in a game and just sort of like try and shoehorn it into a film or TV show just because it exists within the game. So they do need to be very flexible in that sense, but they should always be on hand for that sort of sense check to make sure the values are still there, the core identity is still there, and that it will still be recognizable as that game IP.
Okay. We do have another question. This might be for you, Sienna. It's not entirely clear, but there's a question in the chat from Ann Tool. Can you guys walk us through the process of getting a license, then turning around and selling it, turning it into, say, a TV series? What's the process for? I guess we might have some indie developers watching by the sound to it. What's the process they need to go for?
Well, firstly, to find out who's representing that brand. It could be done in-house. It could be an agency like ourselves, and you would speak to the licensor and with your idea of how to expand on their brand and what products you're trying to deliver, or whether it's a film or TV show, or whether it's physical product or merchandise or a collaboration. And obviously there'll be a royalty involved, and I guess that a business plan, like where are your products going to end up, and really to demonstrate that you really understand that brand as well, that it's safe in your hands. You're not sort of going to take it and sort of use it in a way that is sort of goes against what that brand is kind of all about. So Yeah, it's it's quite a process. You know, there is a lot of trust, there's a lot of experience that goes within it. If you have a great idea though, and you have great products, and you know you have a route to market, then yeah, you know, a lot of gaming companies will be very interested in your ideas.
Well, I'll ask this. This isn't a question I was planning to ask, but it's sort of coming up for this. What should game creators be wary of when it comes to licensing their games? What should they be? Who should they be avoiding? What's a concern? Any of you can go on that.
I think
No, go on.
I was going to say it's a bit like they should be concerned about a bit of a land grab. You know, like, you know, everyone knows that video game IPs are really popular at the moment, and they're seeing it everywhere. And you know, there may be some, you know, companies that just want to sort of grab all of them and not really do anything with them, just sort of have it. So that's one thing that, you know, should be wary of. You know, always just to make sure that whoever it wants to use the IP completely understands, you know, all about the IP, how, you know, the fan base, and how to, you know, make the most of it. I think that, you know, that's one of the things in, you know, that's kind of the best practices in licensing, really, just to sort of avoid the sort of any land grab.
Yeah, we certainly know of companies that are buying IP and then sitting on it, not necessarily intentionally, but you know, I think that the key thing is to make sure if you're optioning your IP to do it for a limited period, so that, you know, in a book deal it might be you might option for 18 months, and then it has to be renewed. So that's one way of protecting yourself, and I think it's also making sure that the company is listening. You know, because, and it's obviously easier if you're with one of those bigger companies where you've got lawyers, etc. But if you're sort of 3 or 4 man band, I think you can go on your gut if you trust people. But I think the key thing is when you say things about what you need creatively in terms of, you know, your role, but also in terms of what they want to do with it is that they're listening to you and there's a proper conversation going on. Because if you don't get that conversation going initially, and if it's not there, if it's just a bunch of guys coming in and saying, look, we'll write you a check, then actually in a way you're better off, you know, depending what your priorities are. But if you want your IP to be respected, if you like, and done decently, you might be better off taking a slightly smaller check from a company that's going to listen and have a collaborative and trusting relationship, rather than a company that's just going to say, okay, we'll give you $10 million, but then we'll sit on it, or we'll make some dreadful show that you'll hate forevermore. And I think that works universally. I mean, my experience is mainly from books and graphic novels in that respect, but I think it applies equally to gaming. You have to feel comfortable.
Do you agree, Dimitri? Is there anything to add?
Yeah, I would just, you know, if I were talking to a rights holder as a friend, I would say just make sure whoever's approaching you is coming from a genuine place. You know, on our team, you know, Stefan was a creative director at Telltale Games. Dan started as a game journalist, game producer. So we actually play games. And not all the time, but most of the time when we approach someone about a game, it's something that one or all of us is actually playing, invested in. You know, we kind of, you know that there's something there. And, you know, as producers, we don't get paid until something's greenlit and made. So for us, it's not just about securing rights, it's about putting in that investment that may, majority of the time, lead to nothing. So you really got to be passionate about it. You really want to make sure that you're all on the same page, because otherwise you're just wasting their time. And, you know, one thing we've learned is this is as international as the gaming business is, it's also very small. So it only takes, you know, grabbing someone's property 1 or 2 times and sitting on it and doing nothing with it for that to very quickly get around. So on both sides, on the IP holder side and also on the other side, if you're trying to get those rights, just really take into consideration, you know, what that person may have sacrificed to get that game out there, and just make sure you're ready to give it your all every single day to try to make something happen.
Questions are coming in thick and fast. We'll try and get through as many as we can before we wrap up. This one sort of follows on from that in a way. Taylor Henderson wants to know, what do typical royalty rate structures look like, and understands that there's likely a range.
That's you, Matthew.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm trying to recall it, actually, to be honest. I mean, look, again, you know, and I know this is the most annoying answer ever. It does depend on the case. I mean, if it's a massive piece of IP, then obviously the option price is going to be much, much more significant. So you're talking about certainly tens of thousands of pounds in terms of the option, and then the purchase price will probably be six figures. And I'm going to get hate mail from the BBC lawyers tomorrow for saying that. But I mean, that's a roughly sort of sense of the figures. And then you get a percentage of net. So if we make the show and then we sell it, you know, to various territories, then you would get a percentage of that, which would all be in the contract. I mean, the terms are, from our point of view, relatively standard. And again, as you say, Chris, it kind of goes back to the previous answer, which is, you know, there will be significant amounts of money. If you're better off if you're new, I think, to the process as a games creator, and you're not necessarily sure about the relationship, signing a shorter option for less money than kind of taking some enormous amount of money for some enormous option where you may end up regretting it. So I think it's tentative steps. I mean, I think hopefully from our point of view, because we have a BBC reputation to hold up, you can obviously trust us, so it's fine. But there are companies out there that do want to bank IP that may be a bit less scrupulous. But yeah, I mean, I think, look, you can make a lot of money if you have the right IP. It is obviously a negotiation. You have to use a lawyer. But if you're being offered, you know, tens of thousands of pounds for, say, an 18-month option, then that's roughly right. And the purchase price should probably be certainly in the high tens of thousands or six figures, I would say.
I think panel seems to agree. I think you've managed. Is that right?
Yeah. It varies widely on you know, what the product is, for how long, you know, the territories, you know, all sorts. So there isn't really like a set figure. It's all sort of up for the negotiation.
Yeah, and I would just throw in there for anyone who hasn't gone through it, just the key difference between film and TV. Like film, you're going to see a much larger number up front because odds are that's pretty much all of the numbers you're going to see. Whereas with TV and success, you can do extremely well.
I just want to say we've gone through 12 hours as our first cat incident. Okay, great. And there's a question here from Robbo, but Robbo, we actually did answer that question about video games movies that have flopped and why that's changed. That's the first question we asked. So just go back to the beginning. I know you missed the beginning there. I'm going to ask one more question, I think, because I am out of time. And that question is, what advice would you give to games companies looking to license their IP to a production company or any other form of entertainment? What one piece of advice would you give them?
Be open to having the brand interpreted in a different way so that it can be you know, adapted for screen. You know, you want it to be, you know, the idea is to not to make it so that it's just for the fans, you know, the people who play the game. You want it to be completely accessible to people who may not have played the game, but they would still appreciate, you know, the world that you've created in the game. So yeah, be open, be flexible to it, but always, you know, keep it, you know, core to the identity of the game. Yeah, I think that's all my advice on that.
I think that's brilliant advice. I mean, I can't really add to that other than to say just yeah, as a creator, make sure the person you're talking to is treating you as if you were a novelist or a graphic novel writer. Don't allow yourself to be treated as you know, not as creative as those people, because you are. And I think it's all about the conversation. And yeah, the openness is really important. As Ian says, I think it's really key that you start dialogue. And you know, actually, you know, we're very open. You know, if you know, we're absolutely ready to be called and sent stuff. You know, we want to see everything. You know, and we're very responsive to that. So don't be scared of starting the conversation, because we're really interested in this stuff.
Yeah, I of course selfishly would start by saying, give me a call. beyond that, you know, I would also, in addition to all the great advice they just gave, I would just add, you know, really take a step back and look at your IP and really be honest about it. Like, is there, you know, a unique way in? Are there, you know, is there a potential story in that IP that, you know, we haven't seen before? And if so, I think that, you know, the rest can kind of happen once they go out and reach out and try to introduce their IP to either film or TV. You know, I think great story is always going to kind of come to the top. And, you know, if you have that, reach out. Hollywood's ready to listen.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That concludes our panel. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you to Dimitri, Sina, and Matthew. Thank you very much. Thank you all for tuning in, for asking such amazing questions. There was actually a couple more that came in at the end there, but we are running out of time. But as you say, give them a call. They'll happily help and try and hear you out. This also concludes the presentation part of Changing Channels. If you missed any of the talks today, don't worry, you can watch them all again. They're on our YouTube channel. They're on live.gamesindustry.biz as well. And yeah, you can rewatch them at your leisure. If you still want more, in a few minutes, I'll be jumping on Zoom for our exclusive networking event. You need to have registered for a ticket to get the login details if you want to come into that. But the good news is you can still register for a ticket, even though we've finished this bit. Just go to our Eventbrite page, but be quick, it will be closing in about half an hour. If this is where we leave you, I hope we will see you again. We are back on September 9th and 10th for our 10th anniversary Investment Summit event, which you can register for now. The talks are free. Meeting systems only cost $10 if you want to meet investors or developers. And after that, we have the Best Places to Work Awards for the UK on September 18th. Tickets are available for that as well. That's also free. And we will also be doing some cool stuff at EGX Online, EGX Digital and PAX Online, or PGX as we call it internally. Don't tell anybody. I hope you found today useful, and I'll hopefully see you all soon. Goodbye.